So a few announcements, I guess. First off, our next piece of the eating schedule is the graduation banquet tonight, right? And then next week is our regular fellowship meal, I think. Yeah, and then the week after that, VBS. Week after that, National Deaf Christian Workshop. So, which leads into this morning. My granddad is actually going to be preaching this morning, so he will be signing, and I will have a mic and be somewhere in the crowd voicing for him. And so you'll hear my voice, but it'll be him. And so, we've done this. I guess we've done this here twice, maybe. And so that'll be what we're doing. But he's going to kind of talk about the deaf workshop, and we've already set up a couple of rectangle tables, however we want to say them, right? Yeah. Hey, both of those words that I used right there are actual words, at least, right? So, so we have a table set up with a sign-up sheet. Different ways that people can help. You don't have to know sign language to be able to help, because there's plenty of other things. But we've actually got, we've really been able to push registration this year way better. So last year, I want to say, I just had my counts from the back of the room, counting everybody, and then being this is how many people are in the kitchen. Okay, well, this is the number of people we had here. And registration didn't quite go off the way it probably should have last time we did this, but this time we've been able to do a really good job, and we actually have already more people registered this time, or about as many people registered this time as came last time. So we still have almost a month to go. So we have almost 100 people registered right now, and total, including volunteers, last year we had 140, or last time was 140. So it looks like we're set to have a much bigger one, which 140 was bigger than it's been in a while, so hopefully this continues and grows. It's definitely a mission field that needs work, needs people who are willing to go to it, because there's less, by even the most generous estimate that you can find, less than 10% of deaf people in America even know who Jesus is. It's just one of those things where you kind of miss out on sidebar conversations when you're deaf. And we don't really realize on how much, it's not that they're not intelligent enough, it's just that you miss out on all this peripheral stuff, yesterday, as I was walking through Free's campus, there was 2 conversations I remember, that I told Angie about, right? But if I was deaf, I'd just walk by those and I wouldn't, have heard that, have this little bit of extra added knowledge and understanding maybe about a couple just little things, right? But those things add up over time. So if nobody actually takes the time to sit down and talk to a deaf person about Jesus, then how are they going to know?
What's the percentage of the population?
The number, I believe, this is people who are what we would call big D deaf. That's culturally deaf. So there are people who are profoundly deaf, right, as a diagnosis from an audiologist, and would be late deafened. If you're 50, right, and you become deaf, well, you're probably going to develop some different methods for coping with that than if you did when you were 2, right? It's just natural. And so you're going to have different accommodations that are going to be made for you and different things like that. So people who I believe are culturally deaf, I believe that number is about 2 million in the United States. There are
10% have no knowledge of Jesus.
No, 10% have a knowledge of Jesus, and that's of all kinds of things. There are less than 300 people worldwide who are full-time working in deaf ministry, and that's of all faiths. So 300 people in the entire world. There's the U.S. has a pretty low population of deafness, actually. So you think about worldwide. There's a whole lot of work that needs to be done here, but then you think about the entire world. There's a lot of people that need to be found. So workshop, that's going to be talked about this morning. I assume he's probably going to go into that now that he handed over his lesson to me, as we passed in the door, so I can get a little bit of help there. All right, so this morning we are in 1 Peter. And so we got through a little bit of chapter 2. We got through a little bit of chapter 2 last week. And I want to spend a little bit extra time in chapter 2 and not just jump forward to chapter 3 today. We might have to end up adding a couple extra weeks to our study here, 1 Peter and 2 Peter as we go through, just because there's a lot of information and it's hard to go through this quickly when you get to about this point right here. When we get to about right here. So 1 Peter chapter 2, and we had kind of gotten through verse 12 early. So we were in verse 13. So let's go through and we'll read from 1 Peter 2, verse 13 through 25 right now, and then we will hopefully get into chapter 3. And I am, though, going to kind of skip a little bit here with the husbands and wives portion, because we are on Wednesday nights having the men's training class and the ladies training class. So we have talked or will talk about that, depending on if you're in the men's class or the ladies class, right? So we'll just kind of skim that portion, and then we'll be able to pick up right after it. Not because it's not important, just because we're already kind of addressing it. So, all right, 1 Peter chapter 2. We'll go counterclockwise this time.
Verse 13.
I'll start off and then you hit up 13. Sound good? All right. 1 Peter 2:13. Submit yourselves for the Lord's sake to every human institution, whether to a king as the one in authority or to governors as sent by him for the punishment of evildoers and the praise of those who do right. For such is the will of God, that by doing right you may silence the ignorance of foolish men.
As free, yet not using liberty as a cloak for vice, but as a bondservant of God, honor all people. Love the brotherhood, fear God, honor the king. Servants, be submissive to your masters with all fear, not only to the good and gentle, but also to the harsh. For this is commendable, if because of conscience toward God one endures grief, suffering wrongfully.
For what glory is it, if when ye be buffeted for your faults, ye shall take it patiently? But if, when ye do well, and suffer for it, ye take it patiently, this is acceptable unto God. For even hereunto were ye called, because Christ also suffered for us, leaving us an example, that ye should follow his steps, who did no sin, neither was guile found in his mouth, who, when he was reviled, reviled not again, when he suffered, he threatened not, but committed himself to him that judgeth righteously.
Who his own self bare our sins in his own body on the tree, that we, being dead to sins, should live unto righteousness, by whose stripes you were healed. For you were as sheep going astray, but are now returned unto the shepherd and bishop of your souls.
All right. So, do we remember a little bit what we talked about last week? Not much.
No.
So last week, I know it's been a week, right? But last week we had talked about chapter 2, verse 1. Therefore, putting aside all malice and all deceit, hypocrisy and evil and slander, like newborn babes, long for the pure milk of the word, that by it you may grow in respect to salvation. So we talked a little bit about the maturation process. It's important to go back to basics from time to time and look back on these things that brought us to the Lord. Look back on those things. And then it comes back around to it, verse 11. Beloved, I urge you as aliens and strangers to abstain from fleshly lusts which wage war against the soul. Keep your behavior excellent among the Gentiles, so that in the thing that which they slander you as evildoers, they may, because of your good deeds as they observe them, glorify God in the day of visitation. So that was the last verse we had. So basically, you need to keep your conduct pure. Remember, this is not, the things here are temporary. They are not eternal. We are going somewhere eternal. So because of that, let's have a right perspective and do the right thing, because we know that it's going to pay off in the end. Maybe not necessarily in the moment, but in the end, it will pay off. And then it closes it, that section right there. Keep your behavior excellent among the Gentiles. Now, I think Gentiles right here is basically means unbelievers, right? By this point, the church has grown substantially. I think when he says Gentiles right here, he doesn't mean, he is talking obviously some people who are just Gentiles, right, in general, who are pagans and worship They're henotheistic. They worship all these different gods, and they pick their one favorite one out of it. And so we are talking about this, but I think in general he's just saying non-believers, whether they be Jewish or Gentile, the people who are not believing, act right in front of them, so that way they will. The thing they would slander you as evil, they may, because of your good deeds as you observe them, glorify God in the day of visitation. Someone who is extremely against your beliefs, if you live them, it's possible that you might convert them. If you live out what you actually are saying, it's possible that they look at you and over time, they stop the ridicule, whether it be vocal or in their mind, and over time then become to realize, like, okay, maybe this is important. This is at least important enough for them to continue, right? I think I would venture to say many of us can have good examples of people who were very faithful, and that even after we were away from them or they have left us, that was a big influence on us. I can think of several people who had a very difficult time coming to worship, especially near the end of their life, right? And still did it every time that they were able to, every time that they were physically able to, even though they were in a lot of pain. And that was something that I thought about a lot of, Sunday mornings when I was very tired, and just left home and stuff. I'm completely on my own. No one would ever know if I had gone to worship or not, right? But I think about that example that's been left for me, so it's an encouragement. Well, in the same way, we can encourage people who are non-believers by actually living out our faith and showing it in our daily lives to the point where they go, okay, maybe there is something to this, right? Because I would think, okay, if it was important enough for him to get here, even though that was way tougher than sitting on his couch or laying in bed, right? That would have probably been way more comfortable than coming in here and sitting in the pew and being here, right? But it was important enough for him to do it. So what does that mean for me, right? Well, other people can have that same look. And then, of course, it calls to Matthew 5:16, let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father in heaven. We're going to see, if we get into this this morning, a few different places where the Sermon on the Mount, Peter has a few interesting callbacks to the Sermon on the Mount here in 1 Peter. All right, so as we get into this morning's text, verse 13, submit yourselves for the Lord's sake to every human institution, whether to a king as one in authority, or to governors as sent by him for the punishment of evildoers and the praise of those who do right. So a couple of things here. We are to submit to the government, right? Don't like that, but, or maybe we have varying degrees. I'm saying me personally, right? I don't like that. But our responsibility is to submit to the government. And under this scenario, right, the king or the emperor at the time, right, it's going to be the same word, you have in Rome, and he's going to set up governors in different provinces. So he's going to set up all these different governors over certain areas to handle affairs, and if something gets bumped up all the way to the governor, then it gets sent over to the king, right? It's different than, it's top down as opposed to us today. So each state has a governor, right? But we elect our governor, right? We elect the governor of the state of Alabama. And then the governor is responsible to the citizens of her state, right? Well, this is kind of flipped, right? The king decides who's going to be the governor. So very different dynamic here. Different power. Power is located in a very different location here. But either way, what is the purpose of the king or the governor as laid out in verse 14?
Punish the evil and praise the good.
Punish the evildoers, praise the good. That is the purpose of government, the intended purpose of government, right? As laid out right here. Now, obviously, other things have come up, in our government. We understand punish the evildoers, right? We understand we have a judicial system, and we're supposed to punish those who do wrong and break the law, right? That's it. What is a way that our government praises the good, rewards good. What's one way?
Plaques and trophies and medals. It's true.
Okay. In some situations, yeah, I guess so.
Tax exempt status for.
There you go. That's a really good one. Yeah. You get a tax deduction on contributions to the church, right? You know, you get a tax deduction on that, and then also the congregation itself enjoys tax exempt status, so we don't have to pay taxes on our contribution. So that makes us able to do a lot more good, right? And regardless of what anybody wants to say, churches have been the greatest source of good and the greatest source of taking care of kids, especially in human history. You know, even back to the first century when children were exposed. You have a child and you don't want the child because it's deformed or, a little person, or it's a girl and you wanted a boy, right? That was actually the majority of it. I wanted a boy, it's a girl. You'd go outside the city to a trash heap and throw the baby on top and leave it there and go about your business, right? So that's what they did in Roman time. Well, the church came in and took those babies and raised them and took care of them. So that's where orphanages originally came up. That's what the church did, right? And so all throughout human history, especially when it comes to taking care of kids, that's what the church has been the greatest source of good there. So tax exempt status is a really, really big deal because it makes your dollar go way farther. If we only had 66 cents on the dollar for every dollar that we contributed, right? How much more would we be limited in what we could do? I mean, how many less missionaries could we support? Because the work of the local church has to support the local church, right? I mean, you have to take care of the needs of the local church, right? Whatever that entails. Like we have the building, we have the grounds, we have the staff, we have all these pieces that have to be taken care of, but we're able to go so much farther and support many missionaries, right? Well, how much less work could we do in that capacity if we had to pay taxes on that? It'd be significant, right?
Effectively a third.
Yeah. I mean, right?
34%.
Yeah. What's that?
34%. 34%.
Yeah. 34% less. Yeah, okay, I got you. I was like, did I say it wrong or something? I got 34% less. Yeah, exactly. But depending on the way the budget works, maybe even more possibly. But just
our contribution is it would probably be more than that.
Yeah, because there's
bracket wise, it's what we would hit.
you have to prioritize. Unfortunately, the first thing to go is generally the mission budget. That's just kind of unfortunate, but the local church does have to support the local church. So, we can always do more. But I'm just saying, like, if we had this much less to work with, we could cut from this area, but it would still, you'd lose down here. So that's definitely a way that we praise the good, and then the government does praise the good. Now, all these additional things aren't really the intent of government. They're just later additions. Somebody made a really good point. This was a very good point about the government taking care of every need, right? In the first century, who was taking care of every need?
Church.
Each other, right? The church as the people, right? They took care of each other, right? So if somebody actually needed something, if somebody needed to help cover something because there's a real need that occurs, the church has the benevolence work where we take care of each other, right? That's the way it's supposed to work, right? The only time in biblical history where we have the government come in and take care of all your needs. You might remember the story of Joseph, right? Worked well for a generation, didn't it? And then the people were enslaved, essentially. So that's kind of what happened there. But the intent of government is to punish the evildoer, praise the good. That's the idea here. So because of that, what are we supposed to do? Verse 13, first word.
Be subject.
Yeah, submit, be subject to the government. Yeah, Don't like that. I don't like anybody telling me what to do, right?
I like Jesus telling me what to do.
Yeah.
I don't mind that at all.
I
Not
think-
some parasitic whatever.
I'm sure this verse always stirs up a lot of discussion because the government that they were having to be subject to is a lot different than the government that we're having to be subject to.
Exactly.
They had no control, and it may feel like that today for us, but back then they had no control over who was ruling them and
Yeah.
who was making the laws. So obviously, they were to be subject to those laws as long as they were not going against God. But other than that,
Exactly.
they had to be submissive.
And I think that's what he's saying here in verse 16. Act as free men, and do not use your freedom as covering for evil, but use it as bondslaves of God. Use it as servants. God, I'm there. And then verse 17, honor all people, love the brotherhood, fear God, honor the king. Now, if you remember specifically, we were talking about this being written sometime in the early 60s. You know who the king was during this time?
Nero.
It was Nero. He was the first person to really start persecuting the Christians. He was the one who brought in Christians, dipped them in oil, set them on fire to light his gardens all night. So that was Nero. Okay. So verse 17, honor all people, love the brotherhood, fear God, honor the king. All right. That's very difficult for us to do. If you especially consider their circumstances, it's extremely difficult for them to do, right? Would not want to do that, I mean, how are you supposed to give honor to the king, right? Definitely, at least means give honor to the office, right? That's a responsibility or requirement that we have, because the point of government, whether or not it is doing what we want it to do at the time. And I think also our American perspective, we have way more freedom in changing our government. So we have a lot more control than most people throughout the course of human history. So we can actually criticize the government. That's one of the first things that the government says. You can criticize the government, right? First Amendment, right? So we can say, don't like this, right? And we're free to say that in America. Well, even them who they were not free to say this, they were told to honor the king, right? So we're in a way better situation than they were back then. It's still difficult, right? Still difficult for us today. I think all of verse 17 is difficult because it says honor all people. Okay, well that's difficult to because sometimes there's people you don't want to try to get along with or be nice to, right? I just that seems like a extra step that I don't want to take, right? Okay, that's difficult. Love the brotherhood. That can be very difficult, right? Fear God. Perhaps we do. Perhaps we don't do that as well as we should. We give honor to God and have reverence for God as much as we really should, but honor the king. Very difficult for us to do right there. And like I said, I think a lot of it has to do with just our perspective on government is just very different than pretty much everybody else through human history. And we have the ability to say, okay, this is wrong without real fear of persecution. Although that may very well be coming, right? But who is Paul talking to right here? He's talking to Christians who are being persecuted right now, right?
In our mindset's different because we formed our nation out of revolution.
Yeah.
We were a nation of revolutionaries. It's kind of hard to wrap your head around this.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that so we are way more free than they were, right? But you're supposed to act as a free man. But what is the way in which you're supposed to act? Well, everything we talked about last week, right? You're supposed to have no envy, no malice. You're supposed to treat all people kindly, and as he's going to talk about, showing honor to whom honor is due, right? Whether or not we actually like those people, we have to have a good attitude towards them. So that's how they were supposed to act. I'm free, but because I'm free, I'm going to be submissive to the government. So you cannot have submission without freedom, really. I mean, you can have, forced obedience, right? It's like a kid. You can hold a kid in timeout, right? They have not submitted to you. They are not obeying, right? You're just bigger than them, So that's a very different situation. Peter says here, consider yourselves as free, whether or not you are, right? And whether or not in this situation you are literally a slave or not. But consider yourself free, and with that freedom, act in a right way, even when it comes to a government that is extremely oppressive. There's no revolutionary kind of mindset in the Bible at all. Really not. Or overthrowing the government or anything like that. There's no slave rebellion outlined. There's simply principles outlined where, if they are followed, we'll have good results. If government follows the principle here in verse 14, our responsibility is to punish evil and praise good. Will our world be better? I mean, if that's the role the government took, if I said that's our responsibility, yeah, the world will be better.
That's all they did.
Yeah.
Great.
If we were to look at, what was that? Acts chapter 2, right? And think about everyone providing for each other's needs, right? I mean, that's what the early church did. And we've kind of outsourced that because of the government, right? Well, the government takes care of that, right? I think that's why a lot less people, bring kids into their home and stuff, because it's now at arm's length, right? If we were in the first century and we actually saw, babies on top of a trash heap, we'd probably feel differently, right? And I think we would, but we're able to kind of put it at arm's length because of that. So, but then taking care of each other, right? We kind of outsource that too, right? Well, I don't need to take care of each other, right? Let's keep all this private. Just, I'll do me, you do you, and I'll be okay, right? So I think in a lot of ways it makes it a lot more difficult. But you look at other things, if we're done correctly, slavery is talked about in the Bible, but if you look at Old Testament slavery essentially is what we consider indentured servitude, right? Essentially, without going into too much detail. But New Testament slavery, enslaving people, is flatly condemned, right? It is in 1 Timothy, right? Lists people who enslave others along with murderers, and so. But if you were to follow the principles laid out, like in the book of Philemon, to treat everyone as a brother, to receive slaves as brothers. Well, can you own your brother? No. So there's no revolutionary idea, but to be a revolutionary. But there are revolutionary ideas in Scripture, right? If we were to follow this, we would have a much better place. If we were to actually follow these rules, then things would be better. And so this simple groundwork, can't change the government, can't do anything. Well, they really felt like they couldn't change the government, but did that stop them from acting freely in order to submit to the government and help other people? No, and they still did it, right? They still worked out and helped each other. Next verse, servants, be submissive to your masters with all respect. See a theme here, perhaps? Be submissive. Servants, be submissive to your masters with all respect, not only to those who are good and gentle, but also to those who are unreasonable. For this finds favor, if for the sake of conscience towards God a person bears up under sorrows when suffering unjustly. For what credit is there if, when you sin and are treated harshly, you endure it with patience? But if you do what is right and suffer for it patiently, endure, this finds favor with God. So, anybody ever had a unreasonable boss? Anybody ever felt in a situation where it's unreasonable? This word right here, servants, it's a little bit different than the one that typically translated slave, such as a few verses previous, or bond slaves in some versions. there's interesting discussions about using the word slavery in translations of the Bible, just because they know from a 21st century North American context, we're going to look at it very differently than they did in the Mediterranean area in the first century. But this is actually a word for like a household servant, right? A household servant, household slave, right? Be submissive to your master. So have you ever had anybody who's extremely unreasonable? Probably never experienced that, right? Somebody who is just truly unreasonable at this. Well, what is this saying, right? Okay, sometime you're going to have to work for people who are unreasonable. And if you endure it with patience, then that's a credit for you. Now, if you're the one who's failing or sinning in this scenario, this is more than just like, oh, I missed the deadline kind of thing. This is, an affront to somebody, a sin against somebody, right? And you suffer for that. Okay, well, that's because you messed up, right? You did the wrong thing. That's one thing. But it's praise to you if you suffer for what's right and patiently endure it. Why does that find favor with God?
That's what Christ did.
That's what Christ did.
His whole life.
Yeah. I mean, he never did anything wrong. Never did anything wrong. And he was, abused and mistreated up to the point of death on the cross. And how did he endure it?
Without a word.
Yeah. And through a couple of trials silently, right? He didn't even respond to his accusers. You think Jesus could have talked his way out of that? I can't think. I mean, the governor and the two people who are over the area, Herod and Pilate, they wanted to free Jesus, right? It was just the mob, right? The Jews who are in power right here have me in a real bind right here. I have to answer to these constituents every day, right? So this guy won't even say anything. Do you think Jesus could have come up with a very solid legal argument to get out of it? Yes, absolutely. They did so many illegal things in doing this. I actually heard this. Somebody was saying, like, this would never happen because this was illegal and this was illegal. And I was like, that's the point. You kind of missed the point right here. They did so many things. Jesus could come up with a really good legal defense here, but he didn't. He suffered for doing good. Next verse, for you have been called for this purpose, since Christ also suffered for you, leaving an example for you to follow in his steps, who committed no sin, nor was any deceit in his mouth. And while being reviled, he did not revile in return. While suffering, he uttered no threats, but kept entrusting himself to him who judges righteously. He himself bore our sins in his body on the cross, that we might die to sin and live to righteousness. For by his wounds you were healed. For you were continually straying like sheep, but now you have returned to the shepherd and guardian of your souls. Peter does a great job of giving us very difficult teachings that we may not want to accept, and then bringing it about to what is your purpose? What is your goal? You may suffer, right? Prepare for suffering. It may be time for us to really prepare for suffering as Christians, right? Okay. For what credit is there if, I believe that's the word right there, verse 20, right there. I'm sorry, I've lost my spot for that note. Anyway, so you're going to suffer for righteousness' sake, right? And because that's what happened to Christ, right? If we remember our purpose and we remember whose we are, as Glenn said last week, if we remember that, then it becomes a little bit easier to honor the King, right? It becomes a little bit easier to accept the situation we are in. Now, obviously, we're in a unique situation in America where we can vote on things. We can actually make our voices heard, right? And so in so doing, we should try to encourage the things of God, right? But at the end of the day, we have a responsibility to this, and Peter says, hey, even if you're suffering for doing good, it's okay, because that's what happened to Jesus. And because of what happened to Jesus, what can happen now to us? Yeah. We have the ability to go to heaven, right? Because we were all like sheep and were astray, but now have turned to the shepherd and guardian of our souls. As we close out here, turn over to Matthew chapter 5. Matthew chapter 5, when Jesus begins the Sermon on the Mount, here's how he begins it, the Beatitudes. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are the gentle, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be satisfied. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God. Blessed are those who have been persecuted for the sake of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people insult you and persecute you and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward in heaven is great, for in the same way they persecuted prophets who were before you. So when we are persecuted for good, when we are persecuted for the sake of Christ, what's our response supposed to be? Rejoice. Congratulations. Because you're thinking about the end. Not because it's enjoyable right now, but because you're thinking about the end. Alrighty. See everybody next week. Well, hopefully before that.